Okay on your end?
Yeah, it looks great. Thanks, Ruthann.
Okay, awesome. All right, there we go. Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for the opportunity to share some information about our SCID screening for premature infants quality improvement project. My name is Ruthann Scheller, and I'm honored to be presenting with Amy Gaviglio today. We're going to be sharing some updates as well as a little glimpse into what we found so far in our preliminary analysis. So we're very excited to be sharing these updates with you. We are presenting on behalf of our project team and the Association of Public Health Laboratories, which is also known as APHL. And for those of you who are just learning about APHL, our vision is a healthier world through quality laboratory systems. We aim to shape national and global health outcomes by promoting the value and contribution of public health laboratories and continuously improving the public health laboratory system in practice. Through my role at APHL and on the newborn screening and genetics team, I've had the privilege of working with both the IDF and newborn screening programs over the past 7 years. Today, we're going to begin with a brief background behind our project. We'll share some more information about our project's aims and significance. We'll then give an overview of our project's timeline and then share a preview of our analysis thus far. We're then going to touch on some of the needs that were uncovered throughout the course of this project and then wrap up with some of our plans for future analysis. We're also looking forward to taking some time today to share some questions and reserve some time for discussion. So we hope you'll join us for that. All right, so let's first take a step back and discuss newborn screening. In the United States, newborn screening is a state public health service designed to identify individuals in a population at high risk of certain congenital or heritable disorders. With approximately 4 million newborns screened for at least 30 primary conditions every year, newborn screening is recognized as one of the most successful public health programs in the United States. In May of 2010, SCID was added to the Recommended Uniform Screening Panel, also known as the RUSP, and by 2018, we celebrated all 53 newborn screening programs within the United States and associated territories offering screening for SCID. Newborn screening for SCID is done by looking for T-cell receptor excision circles, or TRECs for short. TRECs are found in every healthy newborn's blood. They are present when T cells are being produced. Since babies with SCID have few to no T cells, they have few to no TRECs in their blood. Over the years, newborn screening for SCID by measurement of TRECs has proven to successfully identify newborns with SCID and severe T-cell lymphopenia as intended. However, at the same time, ongoing experience with the screen has revealed that many newborn screening programs are facing the challenge of high false positive results, especially a disproportionately high number in the premature infant population. And as a result, premature infants often undergo unnecessary follow-up and diagnostic testing. These false positive results are generally due to the relative immaturity of a premature infant's immune system and T-cell development at the time of newborn screening. Abnormal screens may also represent T-cell defects such as the ones listed on this slide. These challenges were confirmed as widespread when we held a national webinar in February of 2020. APHL, along with the SCID Compass program and the Newborn Screening Translational Research Network, hosted a SCID national webinar focused on issues associated with screening preterm, low birth weight, and NICU babies. During this webinar, our esteemed colleagues, Carol Johnson and Dr. Mary Beth Fasano at the Iowa Newborn Screening Program shared some of the challenges that have emerged regarding screening this population since they went live with SCID's newborn screening in 2014. Their initial screening algorithms had posed many concerns about how frequently repeat screens were being conducted and how many of these screens were ultimately false positive, placing undue burdens on families in the newborn screening system. Their team had concerns about causing parental anxiety when they were already going through a lot in the NICU. They wanted to ensure that any additional testing that was requested was necessary, given that blood volume was already an issue amongst this population. Additionally, neonatologists were starting to mistrust newborn screening results since many of them resulted in false positive or transient T-cell lymphopenia. In response to these concerns, they've modified their SCID newborn screening algorithms to follow separate protocols based off babies' gestational ages. Following their presentation, we launched a live poll to see if other programs could relate to these challenges, and if so, if they would be interested in participating in a multi-center analysis. This multi-center project would allow us to get a better understanding of what was working well and not so well for programs, and offer guidance to what may eventually be considered a best practice. The poll results suggested that many states face these challenges among their premature infant population, and that's when this project emerged. For this project, we're evaluating characteristics and outcomes of SCID screening in premature infants among multi-state newborn screening programs. Our goal is by the end of this project, we'll be able to share best practices or strategies that could reduce the unnecessary follow-up activities associated with false positive results in premature infants. To get to this completion goal, we've identified 3 specific aims that you'll see on this slide. For specific aim 1, we are in the process of assessing SCID screen positive results and associated follow-up actions and outcomes grouped by distinct gestational age and birth weight categories. Amy will be going over the data that we requested in just a little bit. For specific aim 2, we have begun assessing the association between SCID screening false positive rate and gestational ages and birth weights. For specific aim 2, we're taking a closer look at average and median TREC values to get a better understanding and graphically represent the trajectory of TREC values across both birth weight, and gestational ages. And then for specific aim 3, using the outcomes and information provided by our analysis, we're planning to identify best practices that either reduce the SCID screening false positive rate or provide more appropriate recommendations for follow-up of presumptive positive results in the premature infant population. On this slide, you'll see a visual of the 8 newborn screening programs who are currently participating in this project. These states account for 27.6% of all the births in the US using birth rates from 2021. And I'd like to take this time to express how immensely grateful we are for the countless hours these programs have spent volunteering their time to participate in this project. As far as our current progress on this project, this slide captures some of the highlights. So beginning in September of 2021, we invited all newborn screening programs to attend a national webinar that provided an overview of our project goals. Following this national webinar, we received interest from 15 newborn screening programs, and unfortunately, not all of them were able to participate due to various barriers that we'll be addressing a little later on in this presentation. In October, we submitted an application for full institutional review board exemption to the University of Wisconsin IRB, and this project was recognized as IRB exempt. Then in December of 2021, we invited all interested programs to join us for part 1 of a data review call to discuss the case level data elements we were intending to collect. During this call, we received insightful feedback from states regarding the feasibility of providing the case level data elements we were interested in. We also received some concerns regarding the volume of data that we were initially requesting to be provided. In response to these concerns, we invited a biostatistician from the University of Wisconsin-Madison to join our project team and help us think through how to make this data request as manageable as possible. We then held part 2 of a data review to discuss the aggregate level data that we were intending to collect, as well as share updates regarding the data considerations that were discussed during part 1 data call. From March through May of 2021, the SCID quality improvement team further defined data elements and the data collection methodology, and we worked on establishing very secure privacy and security parameters. In June of 2021, the SCID quality improvement team worked with 3 newborn screening programs to perform a pilot to get a sense of how the data extraction, collection, and cleaning process would go. And following that pilot, we shared some of the lessons learned with the other programs that were participating. And then from July 2021 until present, the SCID quality improvement team has been working very closely and offering technical assistance to 8 newborn screening programs with their data submission. Thus far, we've received 7 complete data sets, and we're waiting on just 1 more, and we are very, very excited to be at the preliminary analysis stage. Additionally, we've been using the past few months to meet individually with each of the programs that participated or who had initially expressed interest and weren't able to participate, to get a better understanding of what worked well, as well as what barriers were present, or what could have made this process easier to participate. So we'll be touching on that in just a little bit. I'm now going to hand it over to Amy to share a glimpse of what we've found so far and our plans for the future.
And thank you so much, Ruth Ann. Can you hear me okay? All right, let's do next slide. So again, thank you to the SCID Compass program for the invite today. And for the remainder of our time, we want to talk a bit more about our data analysis thus far, as well as some key lessons we have already learned in working through this project. So as Ruth Ann mentioned, the goals of this project are to systematically assess SCID screening in the premature birth population to see if we can't better understand how TREC values correlate to gestational age or low birth weight or birth weight, and to try to develop better evidence-based recommendations for screening in this population. So to do this, we requested 3 distinct groups of data from the participating state newborn screening programs. So the first, which is on the far left, we first focused on premature infants with normal or screen negative SCID results on the initial screening specimen. So that initial screening specimen is usually collected between 24 and 48 hours of age. Since this cohort is still really the vast majority of newborns, we did ask for a kind of more simplified, de-identified list of all of these cases, and then pulled a representative random sample from that list. And this representative sample kind of crossed various gestational ages, so we could get a good look at various gestational ages or birth rates. So for the random sample, so for those kind of smaller sample, we asked states to provide additional information. So of course we wanted the birth weight and gestational age, but we also asked for things like what was the exact age at the time of the sample collection? And then of course, what were the screening results? What were those TREC values? So this data then represented our screen negative premature cohort. The second data set focused on premature infants who had screen positive SCID results. So for this group, we asked for any newborns who had a positive SCID result, regardless of which specimen it was on. And then we also asked for all associated specimens for that child, with a number of additional pieces of information. So we asked for the same, pieces of information that we asked for the negative cohort, but then we also asked for things like Had the child been transfused prior to or after the screening specimen? What were the follow-up recommendations for the result because it was positive? And then what was the final outcome? Was this child found to have SCID? Were they found to have some other T-cell lymphopenia? Or was it considered a false positive result? When available, we also asked for any associated kind of diagnostic or flow cytometry data in an effort to kind of help clinically validate the reported outcome. And then finally, our kind of third grouping of data, we asked for aggregate data across the 3 years of study, which again was 2018, 2019, and 2020. And this was really so that we could get a better sense of overall performance of SCID screening, inclusive of the full-term newborns, so that we could really look at how things were looking with full-term newborns versus how things are looking for premature newborns. Next slide. So as many of you are likely already aware, and I can see quite a few members of newborn screening programs on here, newborn screening programs do exhibit variation in a number of areas that span both the laboratory and the follow-up space. So from the laboratory side, we see things like variations in the number of routine specimens collected. So while most states ask for one specimen, usually around 24 to 48 hours, there are a number of states who also ask for a routine second specimen. The specimen is usually collected by the primary care provider around 1 to 2 weeks of age. States also vary on whether or not they use kind of a unique protocol in screening their premature or low birth weight infants. So some states do ask for repeat, kind of routine repeats on this population, just knowing that screening can be especially difficult in this premature group. Programs can also differ in how they do the screening, the testing algorithms used, and the terminology around how the results are reported. And I'll touch on this in a bit more on the next slide as it specifically pertains to SCID. From the follow-up side of things, variations are seen on what the recommendation is after a screen positive result. So whether they just simply request a new repeat, whether they ask the provider to just wait and draw the routine repeat, or whether they request clinical evaluation or diagnostic testing. The case definitions, so defining what the final outcome is, as well as what data is collected on diagnosis or diagnostic forms to confirm or rule out a diagnosis can also vary between programs. Next slide, please. So taking all of this variation into play, not surprisingly, we ran into, I think, a number of interesting considerations for trying to aggregate SCID data in particular across state programs. And so these are highlighted here. So starting with programs, there were varying abilities in what data they collected. So we already mentioned that some do not collect gestational age at all. So they use low birth weight more as a proxy. We also saw variations in abilities of programs to actually link multiple specimens to a single patient, or even easily link diagnostic data back to the screening result. SCID testing also has a fair amount of variability in terms of even how the data is ultimately reported. So some programs, while we're all looking for TREC values, kind of what we use as our final measurement, as our final cutoff, can really vary. So some report the actual TREC copy numbers. Some report what is called a CQ or a CT value. And this is essentially kind of the number of cycles of testing it takes to reach a certain threshold. And some use something called a multiple of the median. So looking kind of how much deviation there is from the median. And so trying to combine these 3 different ways of measuring TRECs proved rather difficult. There's also a lot of variation in the terminologies used, and we will touch on this later as well, but we really had to think through how we asked for this data, because some people call results positive, abnormal, borderline, and making sure that we were truly joining and combining and comparing apples to apples, we really had to think about how we asked for this data and how we mapped it. I already mentioned that there's also differing follow-up recommendations. So we wanted to, in an effort to really understand what was going on in these populations, after a positive result, we had to really think through all of the different ways follow-up could happen. So again, is it just waiting for that routine repeat that they have either as part of their whole program or part of their low birth weight premature protocol? Was it asking for an actual additional repeat outside of the normal process, or were they sending these children to straight to clinical or diagnostic evaluation? So to try to mitigate these, and Ruthann touched on this a bit, we did create a fairly robust data dictionary for programs. We held numerous technical assistance calls to kind of help crosswalk the way the program did their work and called things to the way we wanted the data. And when needed, honestly, at some points, we simply just said, give us what you can, and we'll do the mapping and cleaning ourselves at APHL to try to mitigate the burden for program participation. Next slide. So the next few slides will show some of our preliminary analysis, and because I hope we've laid the foundation of kind of how difficult this has been, both in terms of some anticipated and unanticipated challenges, our data analysis at this point is preliminary, but I think very promising. So here's a graph that shows data combined from 3 states and normalized to multiple of the median, which is shown on the y-axis, and then gestational age in weeks is on the x-axis. So when using a multiple of the median as kind of your measurement, as your unit, it's important to note that actually a higher multiple of the median result, so above usually 1.1, corresponds actually to lower TREC values, and so are more likely to be deemed screen positive. So just wanted to set that tone because it's a little bit of a flip of how we typically think of TREC values. So as a group, data from the 3 states show that the multiple of the median decreased 2.5% over a span of 12 weeks. So from 24 weeks gestational age to 36 weeks gestational age. That is shown kind of in the orange or salmon middle line. So over the same span, the 10th percentile, so that's the green line, of the multiples of the median decreased roughly 1.5%, and the 90th percentile, so that's the blue line, decreased by about 3.4%. And this decrease in each of the above, as you can see, of the above percentiles was mostly linear. Next slide. So this plot looks at multiples of the median values similarly. So again, multiples of the median on the y-axis, but by birth weight instead on the x-axis, using data from a single state that really utilized birth weight more than gestational age. Birth weight ranged for this cohort from just over 400 grams to 2,500 grams, with about 2%, a little over 270 classified as extremely low birth weight babies. So extremely low birth weight babies are those that are less than 1,000 grams, or about 2 pounds, 3 ounces. About 7% were classified as very low birth weight. So that's less than 1,500 grams, or about 3 pounds, 9 ounces. And then the vast majority, not surprisingly, about 90% were low birth weight. So those are those that are less than 2,500 grams, or about 5 pounds, 8 ounces. So again, we see here that the median multiple of the median or MOM had a strictly linear relationship with birth weight, and each kind of 500 gram increase in birth weight was associated with a 0.9% reduction in the median multiple of the median. So increasing birth weight class. So, from extremely low birth weight to very low birth weight to low birth weight is associated with decreasing multiples of the median. Next slide, please. So when data are separated into kind of 20 birth weight cohorts, so kind of 100 gram span per cohort, the same really picture emerges. So there is still no evidence of nonlinear behavior concerning the association between birth weight or grouped birth weight and the median multiple of the median. So the estimated reduction in the median mom per additional 500 gram of birth weight is really the same as reported earlier. So it's kind of just another way to look at the data. Next slide. If we look at it, the data, again, at really the coarsest scale, so kind of those three groupings, the data, resolve into the three birth weight classes and show strong negative association with multiples of the median. So that's to say that increasing weight class really correlates with decreasing multiples of the median, which again really is supporting what we've seen and what we've been hearing is that the lower birth weights, the more premature infants are having higher multiples of the median and thus having higher numbers of screen positive results. If we consider this with, without regard to order, so not thinking about extremely low birth weight being ordered to very low to low, there really appears to be no difference, at least between the extremely low birth weight and very low birth weight cohorts, with really with respect to the distribution of the mom values, though the low birth weight group does differ significantly from each of the extremely and very low birth weight. So interesting to see kind of that grouping, that kind of 1,500 gram to 2,500 gram is really start to see that drop in mom values. Next slide. So owing, very much to some of the difficulties we were hearing about from newborn screening programs, as well as really experiencing ourselves in the data analysis and cleaning process, we did add a component to this project that Ruth Ann mentioned, where we actually met with the program staff who had been really heavily involved in doing the data pull for us to learn more about what had facilitated their involvement and ability to extract their SCID data and what had been barriers to this work. So here you can see some of what we've learned from this, and really hoping to take this and think more about what some of the needs are for newborn screening programs. So not surprisingly, facilitators, those programs who had an epidemiologist or a research scientist or data analysis within their program, obviously a lot easier for them to take the time to understand the data and to have the software and capabilities to pull the data in ways that we wanted. Programs whose LIMS system, so their laboratory information management system, was connected to any of their case management data, obviously also a lot easier. Those that had access to data manipulation software, SAS or R, instead of having to do things in spreadsheets, reported things being a lot easier as well. On the other hand, barriers you can kind of imagine are somewhat the reverse of those. So if you don't have a lot of staff time or a lot of staff expertise in this area, you're pulling bench scientists or individuals who are really trying to do other things to try to pull this data. That was obviously a barrier. If you were having to try to link systems that were otherwise not usually linked, that was a lot more work. If you don't have access to certain software, so you're doing everything in Excel spreadsheets or by hand, much more burdensome. And one person did rightly, I think, and appropriately mention that we kind of picked a tough disease for this work because SCID does have so much variability in the way things, the way that programs do this, that, this was potentially also kind of just adding to some of the complexity. And of course, some of our programs also required kind of data sharing agreements for participation. So we kind of want to take some time with this as on our call today and kind of ask some poll questions of the audience, since this was an interesting kind of pivot for us. And so I'm going to throw it back to Ruth Ann really quickly to queue up some poll questions we have for you along these lines.
Thank you, Amy. So I see there's quite a few folks from the newborn screening field on the call. And as we consider future projects like this, we'd really love to hear from you. If you participated in this project, or you were interested in participating in this project and you weren't able to, or if this is the first time that you're learning about this project, we'd love to just get some feedback on how we could make a multi-site project like this easier in the future. So I don't have a poll that populates, but if I encourage you to either use the chat box to share some feedback, or since we're on a collaborative Zoom, feel free to unmute your line. We'd love to hear from you and help guide us for future projects.
Ruth Ann, I will say, if anyone wants to unmute themselves, just use the raise hand feature, so that way we don't have lots of people trying to compete with their sharing.
Thanks, Alyssa. Sounds good. And also, if you want some time to think about this, please feel free to reach out to us after the presentation. It's very, very helpful to hear directly from you. Give it one more minute to see if anyone's typing in something. While y'all are thinking about that, love to just hear from newborn screening programs that are on the line. Do you currently have access to data manipulation tools? We heard from several programs that participated in this project how valuable it was having access to software such as SAS and R. So we'd love to hear from you. Do you all have access to those? If not, would your program be interested in acquiring data software? Or if we were to host trainings about how to utilize this software, is that something that would be of interest to you all? And if you have, great, thank you, Ellen. If you do have data manipulation tools, if you could list the ones that you have in the chat box, that would be fantastic, so we know what's out there. If you're interested in trainings and you want to chime in, feel free to write that in the chat too.
I think one thing I would add to Ruth Ann is, I know APHL and I think through CDC has been offering data camp licenses for newborn screening programs, and I've done some of it and it's fantastic. So I highly encourage if that's an option for programs, for them to reach out to you to ask, because it's just the way that you learn. It's really kind of learning and doing, which has been really great to learn how to use things like R, Python, SQL, all of those types of softwares and platforms.
Awesome, thank you, Amy. Okay, great, thank you, Ellen. And then one of the other things that Amy just mentioned, so for some of the programs where it went a bit smoother, they had support from an epidemiologist or data analyst as part of their program. For programs that don't necessarily have that expertise as part of their staff, is this something that you'd be interested in? And if this is something you'd like to reach out to us directly about, please feel free to do so. We'll be sharing our emails in just a bit, but just some questions for you all to think about. And we appreciate any feedback that you have that will help us either offer technical assistance in the future, or help guide how to make things go even smoother for future projects. Okay, I will now hand it back over to you, Amy. Thank you.
No problem. Next slide, please. So clearly, we still have a decent amount of work to do on this project to meet the aims that we set at the outset. And now that we do have most of our data cleaned and ready, we can continue to really further examine the association between truck values and birth weight or gestational age, and assess screening performance metrics. So things like false positive rate, positive predictive value for both the premature infants, and really comparing that to how it looks for full-term infants. So from there, and I think one of the biggest things that we really want to come out of this project is to determine what follow-up recommendations in the premature low birth weight population should be, and what those can be to offer that best balance of maximizing detection of affected newborns while really minimizing the unnecessary follow-up activities. So what we're seeing, and we, I think, have heard this anecdotally, but our data is really supporting this, is that many of these infants can end up being screened 5, 6, 7 times. And that's just really not getting us anywhere. And so do we need to think more about when do the TREC values kind of start to become more I guess, representative of what's truly going on with the child, and if we can think through better timing of when those repeats should happen, so that we're getting truly a better sense of the child's true biology and not really reflective of the prematurity process. As an add-on, as well as Ruthann just was alluding to with the poll questions, is also trying to determine how we can take this experience of this project and come up with solutions to really better allow for multi-program projects like this in the future. Because we are talking about rare diseases like SCID, it's really helpful and important when programs can come together to share their data. I think that there's a lot more value in that, and we can really learn a lot more as well. So next slide. So the one thing that we think really will help in this, and I think you've probably heard us use the words variation and differences a lot of times throughout this talk. So we wanted to end with, really thinking through kind of harmonization in newborn screening. This is something that is needed overall, but certainly thinking through as it pertains to SCID as well. So are there ways for us to better normalize data across the varying techniques that are used by programs, as well as the varying measurements? So again, that TREC copy number versus that CQ-CT value, or multiple of the median. Thinking through different ways that we call our results. Are we calling them positive, abnormal, urgent, out of range? Really trying to use more harmonized terminology so that we can all be clear when we're talking about something, that we're talking about the same thing. Case definitions, again, also continue to kind of vary. And so, making sure that when I say this is a true positive case and it's a typical SCID result, that's true across the country, and that others are using those same case definitions. So this is something that is certainly in the works. We are, continuing to think about this across the newborn screening community, but as it pertains to SCID, also bringing in the immunology community as well to help us think through kind of what are the best terms to use, and what should our case definitions look like, understanding that these may need to evolve as we continue to screen and learn more. So next slide, I think this brings us to the end and our acknowledgements, and certainly our project collaborators on this, May Baker and Michael from the University of Wisconsin. Michael's our statistician, and so he put together those beautiful graphs and helped put the words into my mouth to describe them. So thank you so much for that. And then of course the additional team at APHL, Jalili, Sika, and Cole. And perhaps most importantly are the programs, the states that have participated, who I know have gone out of their way to help make this happen and figure out how to get their data out, and the IDF and SCID Compass partners. And Ruthann, I will let you have final word before opening up for Q&A.
Thanks, Amy. And a special thanks to Amy, my co-presenter, who has spent countless hours supporting programs over the past several months to get their data and work with them. So thank you, Amy. So we now have a little bit of time to open it up for discussion. I think some questions came in while we were presenting, so we can address those, but please feel free to send more our way.
Yeah, I think the question from Michelle and just the CBC and if that could be in addition to the dried blood spot, and I certainly open it up to immunologists or others that probably have a bit more, a lot more experience and expertise in that than I do. But I can tell you in terms of what else is typically drawn at newborn screening. So newborn screening is done through a heel stick, so it's a capillary blood draw. The amount of blood that is involved in terms of what we get on the dried blood spot card is about maybe a a milliliter to 1.5 milliliters of blood. And then the TREC analysis is usually done on a small punch from that. So I think it's a really curious question. I was trying to quick while Ruth Ann was doing the poll questions, look at CBC and dried blood spots. I'm not familiar with the feasibility of that or if it's been done before, but I think it's a really interesting thought and would certainly open it up to others who may have comments on that. All right. Hearing none, we can go to the next question. Were there a lot of variations between laboratories and their cutoffs for abnormal TREC values? How many states use borderline for an abnormal TREC, but urgent positive for an extremely low value? That's a great question. And we did ask for their algorithms as well, so that we could better get a sense of when we're seeing values, what that actually meant within the lab. So we haven't done the full analysis on there, but I would say there are variations between labs and their cutoffs for abnormal TREC values, which partially is, I think, a product of whether they're doing TREC copy numbers or CT, CQ, multiples of the median, et cetera. But I think within the groupings, there is less variation. States also seem to, they did seem to treat results that have really, like no TREC amplification or really low values, slightly different than if they did see some. Though that also differs between whether or not I think it's a premature baby or a full-term baby as well. So like in the premature population, if it's just kind of low, I think they were really treating that as likely being premature versus, maybe some other T-cell lymphopenia. And then it looks like there was a response. That's a good point. Yeah, that is a really good point with the dried blood spot, that the volume of blood, especially as we're kind of punching in different areas, is not uniform throughout the spot. Typical cost to run a TREC test on a newborn. That is a good question. I don't know, Ruth Ann, if you have that. I want to say it's like $5 to $10 would be my guess, but that's a guess. If anyone else, any programs or anything have exact numbers, please feel free to correct me or affirm my range.
Yeah, we're happy to look into that.
Michelle, in terms of collecting the newborn screening specimen, are you saying so instead of doing a heel stick, doing blood into an EDTA tube? Yeah, I think there's a lot of conflicting research on what's easier, a heel stick or a venipuncture, but I do know EDTA does interfere with some of our other testing. So we try to not have any, EDTA or heparin in any of our, on any of our dried blood spots, because it can interfere with some of the other analytes that we look for. There are some that do kind of a capillary draw through a venipuncture, but it's still being put onto a dried blood spot. And I think, I don't know if that's Dr. Kabrinsky. I still think the non-uniform issue would still be there. And we're just not simply set up to take in tubes of blood. We are very much using dried blood spots. Our infrastructure our testing is all on dried blood spots. So changing the matrix is difficult.
Well, thank you all so much for tuning in today. One sec, if you have any questions or additional feedback for us, our emails are on this slide. As Amy mentioned before, thank you all so much. Thanks to all of the newborn screening programs that have been working with us for months and months now. We so appreciate you. And thank you to everybody who tuned in today.
Thank you so much, Ruth Ann, and thank you so much to Amy. I think that'll be it for this session. We do have a little bit of a break, and then there are 2 sessions coming up at 2:10 Eastern Time. One of them is Dr. Yolande Walter, who'll be presenting some of her work on her study with the Irish traveler community. And then we have a session that is actually pre-recorded. It's from the PIDTC about their neurodevelopmental study. So if you're interested in learning more about either of those really great studies that we are proud to be sponsoring, we will see you at 2:10. And thank you again, Ruth Ann and Emily, and everyone. Have a great rest of your afternoon. Bye.